serious? What are some of the creepiest declassified documents made available to the public? Not sure if it's declassified, but the case of Hisashi Aochi. He was a Japanese nuclear plant worker who was exposed to a lot of radiation which left him looking like a fallout ghoul. They kept him alive for 3 months even though he was in a lot of pain. His heart even stopped 3 times in an hour, but they kept on resuscitating him. I don't know much about it, but it is interesting to read about. Not so much creepy but rather pretty freaking cool in a 50s sci-fi B-movie kind of way. Project 1794. In 1984, a psychic remote viewed the planet Mars for the CIA. MKUltra was pretty f***ed up. CIA created mind control program that tried a bunch of different things to control behavior in people. Paid people to be LSD test subjects by picking them off street and paying them in cocaine just to leave for them dead after. Among other stuff. Unabomber was a test subject and it f***ed him up and led to him killing people. Also, the author of One Flight Over the Cuckoo's Nest was a test subject. A cool thing I found out from researching the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, is that he was apparently a subject of the MKUltra operation. Not exactly creepy, but Operation Success. The CIA was working on a heart attack gun back in the 1960s-70s. It started off as a conspiracy theory but gained enough momentum nationwide that it forced the US government's hand and they finally admitted the theory was mostly accurate. Short version. They never had a fully functional heart attack gun. But they did have a nearly working prototype. The idea was that it would have a very small projectile that would be laced with a chemical that would induce a heart attack and leave a hole smaller than one left behind by a syringe. While they never had a fully working version, they did have a prototype but abandoned the project once they more or less had to admit the conspiracy was mostly true. I find this to be among the creepiest, scariest things declassified by the government simply because of the consequences of them admitting to having been working on such a weapon. For one, it shows that the US government was very serious, at least at one point in time, about being able to take someone out with it being easily traced back to them. Whether they would have used this on private US citizens or on foreign agents is debatable. But they easily could have used it to silence people who were pushing to further advance civil rights or people who generally spoke out against the government in general. It's also scary because it makes you stop and think how many conspiracy theories are correct or at least scarily close to being correct. Disclaimer. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I do find them interesting and tend to read up about them but have never bought into very many of them. I mostly just find them interesting. Not really classified, but very creepy. The business plot of 1933. The wealthiest businessmen of America, like the names you see on banks and buildings in America today, allegedly formed a plot to overthrow President FDR and install a military leader in his place. Their choice was a U.S. Marine general named Smedley Butler, as he was a decorated leader of the highest rank. Butler, a loyal patriot, played along until they were seriously about to attempt to collapse the U.S. economy by holding the financial stability of the country hostage. He rolled on them and testified to Congress about the planned coup. No one was prosecuted. General Smedley Butler may be the reason the world does not officially have a society like the United Corporations of Rockefeller, Morgan and Chase. Source. Had an activist U.S. Marine general named Smedley Butler, as he was a decorated leader of the highest rank. Butler, a loyal patriot, played along until they were seriously about to attempt to collapse the U.S. Sweden had a compulsory sterilization program. For me, it's normally when the government have outright lied to the general public and put their health at risk. Years of denials follow before they admit their faults. Worst ones I've heard are the Tuskegee soldiers' syphilis experiment. They lied to not just the public but to men fighting for their country. MKUltra LSD experiments. Again, the government acted against the people it's meant to represent and protect. Seeing a theme emerging here. I can go on, but for me it always comes down to that bully boy attitude against what they consider to be a weaker or less important person. Who are any of us to decide who is deserving and who isn't? But what truly shocks is not just what they got away with, but the fact there isn't more outrage or any punishment meted out when it becomes known. The CIA's audio SX tapes of MLK. HBO used the real ones for their LBJ docu series starring Bryan Cranston. Ike. The program was called Counterintelligence Project, COINTELPRO. They tried to infiltrate organizations they felt were anti-American. Of course MLK was the worst of the worst. Can't be getting whites to join his socialist movement. Blasi Kaladazasu PPO said to divide us. The CIA. Probably. Soviet Union's Cannibal Island. Definitely the Jonas Down death tape. That shit proves to be a solid way to lose all chances of sleep. So, here's some context. Jim Jones started a cult called the People's Temple, yes, without the apostrophe, and eventually they moved to a new settlement they built in Guyana called Jonas Down, named after their leader. Since he made them believe he was some form of the Messiah, as a lot of cult leaders did, he could control them all to do whatever he pleases. And one of the things they did was practice drinking Flavor Aid, not Kool-Aid as commonly believed, to prepare themselves for the time when they commit revolutionary suicide. These practices were just normal Flavor Aid Kool-Aid. But Jones told them it was poison just to see their reactions. When the time came, someone recorded what was, essentially, the sounds of people drinking Flavor Aid laced with cyanide, alongside a fatal cocktail of other substances. Many victims, including young children, which you could hear screaming in the audio. 900 or so people died. Only a few didn't. This was the biggest loss of American life in a deliberate act until 9/11. And there is an audio recording of it. And just a very strong reminder. This wasn't mass suicide. This was mass murder. Many people were willing to die at his hands. But all the children and some of the adults didn't. Since all of them were forced to take the drink. It wasn't their own choice to drink it. It was Jones's. So, whilst people believe that it was a suicide, they were all duped into being murdered by Jim Jones. Edit. Fixed the largest loss of American life fact to add in a deliberate act. And talked a bit more about how it was mass murder, not mass suicide. A man named Joseph McMoneagle claimed he had the unusual talent known as remote viewing, where he had the ability to see the world through another person's eyes at any physical place. And any place and time. The CIA ran a test on him in 1984 where they tried to discredit his ability. They gave him a piece of paper with coordinates and a date and time written on it. And told him to tell them what he saw. The catch was the coordinates were on Mars and the date was 1,000,000 years in the past. However, to their surprise, when McMoneagle began to describe what he saw, he described an unfamiliar landscape. And said that he viewed a civilization in dire state. He then went on to describe complex infrastructure spanning the strange landscape. Such as roads, aqueducts, channels and pyramids. He described the entities that he saw as tall shadowed figures. And it appeared that their situation was critical. And on the brink of apocalypse. The CIA declassified the entire transcript, which can be read by anyone online. This. Pretty much anything related to Marie Curie. Pedro Albizu Campos was arrested a third time and imprisoned for 26 years for working to make Puerto Rico independent by the American government. The cause was that members of the Nationalist Party shot in Congress and unfurled the Puerto Rican flag. Illegal to do at the time. He wasn't there, but he was the head of the Nationalist Party and the American government had been keeping an eye on him for years. While in prison, his health deteriorated and he said that they were using radiation to kill him in his cells. No one believed him until folders used by the American government to keep tabs on the Puerto Rican people were declassified in the late 90s. There it was found that they were using radiation to kill him, and him, being as smart as he was, tried to slow the poisoning slowly by covering himself with wet towels, getting the nickname King of the Towels by his jailers. That's just one of the many crimes Americans have done against the Puerto Rican people. All public now when these documents were declassified. The findings in the Reese Committee that state the deliberate dumbing down of the US population and the Dodd Report to the Reese Committee on Foundations. He gave a definition of the word subversive, saying that the term referred to any action having as its purpose the alteration of either the principle or the form of the United States government by other than constitutional means. He then argued that the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and Carnegie Endowment were using funds excessively on projects at Columbia, Harvard, Chicago University and the University of California in order to enable oligarchical collectivism. He stated, "The purported deterioration in scholarship and in the techniques of teaching which, lately, has attracted the attention of the American public, has apparently been caused primarily by a premature effort to reduce our meager knowledge of social phenomena to the level of an applied science." Bet you all have not heard of this one. The Manned Orbiting Laboratory was an Air Force project back during the Cold War. Its stated goal was to test the effectiveness of space-based recon. Its hidden agenda was to test the applications of an orbital weapons station. Not only that, it would have been used for global surveillance, including Americans. The government has been plotting to spy on us for over 50 years. Luckily it was cancelled to fund the Vietnam War, and was the military's last chance to develop a space program. http nro gov declassified html. In East Germany, the Stasi collected absurd amounts of information about civilians, later available at the Stasi Records Agency. There was even an archive of people's scents with impregnated cloths. You can visit the museum in Berlin. Recommended. Watch the film The Lives of Others, Das Leben der Anderen, depicting exactly this. Cables on the Tiananmen Square massacre. I had no idea that the massacre was so extensive. In American history our political massacres had body counts that fit on fingers and toes. i.e. Kent State or the Boston Massacre. The extra steps such as directing the protesters to disperse down a prepared safe route and then ambushing them with machine guns on that same route is horrific. The Aversion Project. Evils of homophobia at its absolute worst. In the 1970s South Africa forced lesbian and gay soldiers to undergo sex change operations, chemical castration, electric shock, and other unethical medical experiments. An estimated 900 forced sexual reassignment operations may have been performed between 1971 and 1989 at military hospitals, as part of a top-secret program to root out homosexuality from the service. Those who could not be cured with drugs, aversion shock therapy, hormone treatment, and other radical psychiatric means were chemically castrated or given sex change operations. www.thegworld/2000/jol/29/chrismgrill. Recently the US declassified that the Gulf of Tonkin incident that incited our involvement in the Vietnam War was completely falsified and that American forces were never actually fired upon. This was the triggering event that led to thousands upon thousands of lives being lost, and it was a bold-faced lie to manipulate the American people by a corrupt government. This was the same time frame where college protesters to the war were shot and killed for opposing it. The government made up a war and killed people who didn't want to follow the lies like the brain-dead war machine it wanted them to be a part of. Project Encultura. The CIA was looking to do research into possible mind control truth serums, and thus carried out experiments that involved drugging mental patients with copious amounts of LSD, delivering electric shocks and even torture for what could be months on end. Longest experiment lasted 6 months. While the project was officially discontinued in 1975, a misfilling resulted in 20,000 documents surviving the purge. That and the fact a CIA veteran by the name of Victor Marchetti has gone on the record to claim the experiments were still continuing after the termination date. Make of that as you will.